So just a brief introduction about Congressman Joe Barton, who was first elected to the 6th District of Texas back in 1984. In 2004, he was selected by his colleagues to be the chairman of the House Committee on Energy and Commerce, the oldest standing legislative House committee in history. Congressman Barton was the first Texan since former House Speaker Sam Rayburn to chair this critical committee. There's not a lot of stuff that happens on the Hill that doesn't one way or another go through this committee. Barton's diligent work to promote a conservative agenda and protection of individual rights recently earned him notice from the National Journal as one of the Republicans to watch, quote unquote. And I'm sure they mean that in a good way. Sometimes it could go either way.
There you go.
But he does remain a strong and steadfast House leader on tax reform, which is important to all of us, through the promotion of lower taxes and financial freedom. He supported eliminating the marriage penalty and estate tax, reducing capital gains taxes, retirement of the current code, which I think we'd all agree just overhaul the entire tax code and we'd probably be fine with that. But without any further ado, Congressman Barton, thank you so much for your help, and we appreciate all you do for small business.
Good deal. Well, thank you, and I want to first of all thank you for lunch. I normally, when I come to events like this, I don't eat lunch because it's always cold chicken, and but I walked in and there was a big line, which is a good sign, and I looked over there and you had chicken and beef and fish and soup and looked like cherry cobbler. I thought, well, this may be worth it. And now you've said you've given me $10,000, so I've got to give you a $10,000 speech. I was just going to kind of say hi and bye, but I got to earn my lunch. I was told that this is the first time your association has been on Capitol Hill as a group in 14 years. So that's pretty special. You know, I've been in Congress 29 years. I got elected in Reagan's re-election in 1984. And obviously, I was one of 435 House members. I have a fair number of visitors from Texas in my district and the various groups that are before the Energy and Commerce Committee that I'm the past chairman of and the current chairman emeritus. So I kind of get used to, although I live in Texas, I mean, I got up at 5 o'clock this morning to fly up here. You know, I kind of get used to being here, although I go home every weekend. But then when they said that this is your first time as a group, I thought, well, you know, that's pretty special. Because my guess is that everybody here paid your own way, and that's not trivial. Airline tickets and hotels, which are very expensive in D.C., and the meals, which are very expensive, and so everybody in this room it's a pretty good capital investment on your part to come here. And there's good news and bad news. I'm reminded of one of the first conversations I participated in way back in 1981. I was picked to be a White House Fellow in President Reagan's first term at the Department of Energy. White House Fellows is a program established by President Lyndon Johnson, and they take 15 or 20 young men and women each year, and you work for the president or the vice president or one of the cabinet secretaries, and they have about 1,000 to 1,500 people apply, and they end up with the 15 to 20. So it's not easy to be picked. It's a merit-based program. It's not a political program. I was a plant manager in Crockett, Texas, a little town in East Texas, about 6,000 people, and I was the de facto Reagan for President chairman in Houston County because nobody else wanted to do it, and the Republican hadn't carried Houston County in ever. I mean, it was like, you're for who? So anyway, make long story short, I believed in President Reagan, and when he won, I applied to be a White House Fellow, and I got picked. So I was, you know, you interview for people and cabinets and everybody wants to work for the president. You think you're going to see the president every day, or the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State. Well, it ended up that I could work for the Secretary of Energy, or the administrator of the EPA. And I thought, when I'm from Texas, and when I get finished being a White House fellow, do I want to say I work for the EPA? Or do I want to say I work for the Department of Energy? Well, that was a no-brainer, so I went with the Department of Energy. And they put me in what was called Policy Planning and Analysis, PPA. And every Monday morning at 7 o'clock, believe it or not, there was a staff meeting. And so at my very first staff meeting, here I am, the junior guy. At that time, I think I was 30 years old, 31, and I looked to be about 20. And so I'm sitting in this room with all these brilliant minds from the Department of Energy and senior people, and they were having a debate about appliance standards, air conditioners and refrigerators. And the Democratic-controlled Congress the year before Reagan got elected, when Carter was president, had passed a law that the Department of Energy had to set appliance standards. And so these are the policy guys that are debating appliance standards, and it was just way over my head. And they were debating whether a no standard standard was a standard. Because President Reagan had said he didn't want no appliance standards. And so they were trying to debate amongst themselves whether the president could set as a standard for appliances no standard. And this went on for about 30 minutes, and the director of the PPA, a man named Everett Childs III, looked at me, and he, as a new kid on the block, literally the new kid on the block, he said, "What do you think about this?" And of course, I didn't want to say anything because I didn't know, And so, one of the things you learn real quick, if you don't know the answer, you ask a question. So he said, "What do you think about this, Joe?" And I said, "Well, what do you think about it?" And he said, "What you have here is a non-intersecting conversation." And that's 90% of the time what Washington is all about, non-intersecting conversations. If you ever watch the debates on the House floor, Republican will get up, "I'm for a balanced budget," and we'll talk about how important it is to balance the budget. Then the Democrat will get up, "We have all these needs in America, and we have all these poor people, and we have to provide all these services." Okay? Non-intersecting. It happens every day. So when you go around to your congressional visits, my advice to you, and I'm only telling you this because they told me this was the first time in 14 years y'all have been here as a group, don't engage in non-intersecting conversations. Whatever it is that you really feel, tell the congressman or his staff person what it is you really feel. Tell the truth. Be honest. Be polite. Don't go in there and say, "You dumb SOB, how did you get elected?" I mean, that's pretty direct. But you're going to find if you start off in that tone, it's going to be, "Okay, you got 15 minutes. Why don't we make it 5? There's the door." So be polite, but tell them the truth. My job and all the other 434 congressmen on both sides, our job is to listen to our constituents and then hopefully decide what's the right thing for America. What's the right thing for America? And I learned that from President Reagan himself. I'll tell you one more White House Fellow story, and then I'll get substantive for a few minutes, and then we'll take some questions. But as I told you, I was a White House Fellow in 81 and 82, and one day the Secretary of Energy came into my little cubby hole. I told everybody in Texas it was my office, but it was really a little cubby hole. And he said, "Joe, I'm going over to a cabinet meeting at the White House this afternoon. Would you like to go?" Well, who wouldn't, So I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Secretary, I'd sure like to go." And he said, "You've got to promise me one thing." I said, "Okay, what is it?" He said, "You cannot open your mouth. You are to be seen and not heard. Will you agree to that?" And I said, "Yes, sir, Mr. Secretary, I will not say a word." So we get in the Secretary's car, and we go over to the White House. You walk up to the West Wing, and there's a Marine Guard, and he salutes, and he opens the door, and you walk into the lobby, and you go up, and of course they know the Secretary of Energy, but they don't know me from Adam, and so even though I'm a White House fellow, and so I'm with him, and they kind of look at me, make sure that I'm not a terrorist. And anyway, we go into the cabinet room, and is anybody here been in the cabinet room besides me? So I could say anything, and you wouldn't know where I was telling the truth. Right? Well, it's not a real big room. It's not a real big room, but it does have the cabinet table. And the president's chair is in the middle of the room, middle of the table, and you know it's the president's because it's 2 inches higher than any other chair. He also on the back has a little brass plate that says the president, so that helps. Then across from the president is the vice president, and then on the right hand side of the president is the Secretary of Defense, and on the left-hand side of the President is the Secretary of State. And then in order of when the cabinet departments became cabinet agencies, you have the other secretaries, okay? So you got the President in the center of the room with the big chair, Vice President is across, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, and all the Secretary of Energy is down at the end because it's one of the newer cabinet agencies. So I'm sitting directly behind the Vice President, who is George Bush. So I'm sitting against the wall on a chair like one of you guys are sitting in, and then the Vice President, and I see the back of his head, and then across from him, I'm looking right at the President. I had the best seat in the room, not being at the cabinet table. And I keep saying to myself, don't say a word, don't say a word, don't say a word. So we start out, and the Dave Stockman, who was then director of OMB from Michigan, comes in, and the president says, what's on the agenda today, Dave? And he says, Mr. President, the agenda today is sugar quotas. Sugar quotas. So the president takes a big hand of jelly beans, and Reagan did really like jelly beans. And so everywhere you went in the White House, they had bowls of jelly beans. I guess they thought the president might get lost and wander around. So everywhere you went, you had jelly beans. So, of course, the president takes some jelly beans, and he says if anybody wants one, and, of course, since the president was eating them, everybody else was too, although I know they didn't like them, but they acted like they did. So everybody gets their jelly beans. And he says, who wants to talk about sugar quotas? So the Secretary of Agriculture, who was sitting kind of over here, is a guy named Jack Block. He stood up. He said, Mr. President, I'm Secretary of Agriculture, and as you know, our sugar beet farmers up in the Dakotas and out west, and our sugar cane growers down in Louisiana and Texas, they've been pretty hard hit with sugar imports. And so we want a very small quota. We don't want much sugar to be allowed into the United States. It'll really hurt our farmers. So we're against it. The president said, well, thank you, Mr. Secretary of Agriculture. He said, anybody else want to talk? Well, the Secretary of State was a man named Alexander Haig. You remember Alexander Haig? I'm in charge of the White House Haig. Well, he stood up, and General Haig's not a tall man, so you really didn't know it when he stood up, but he did stand up. And he said, Mr. President, as you know, I'm Secretary of State, and you've got a new initiative down in the Caribbean called the Caribbean Basin Initiative. And a key component of that is that we should allow their number one cash crop, which is sugar, we should allow more of it into America. It will really help my job as Secretary of State if we have a big quota, okay? So the president said, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary of State. He said, anybody else want to talk? Well, there was dead silence. So the president reached over, he took another handful of jelly beans, popped a couple in his mouth. He said, looked around the room, and he said, well, gentlemen, I've heard what's best for the Department of Agriculture, and I've heard what's best for the Department of State, but I haven't yet heard what's best for America. Now, he really said that. I'm not making this up. And of course, I was told I had to be quiet. Now, I told you earlier that in 1980, I was the volunteer campaign chairman for Reagan for president in Houston County, Texas. Okay? And I applied to be a White House fellow because Reagan won that year to be president. So as soon as Reagan said that, I was looking right at him and I said, "Way to go, Mr. President, that's why I voted for you." Every head in the room turned, "Who is this guy?" These are these super cool cabinet secretaries in the White House, in the cabinet room, discussing high national policy, and some wet behind the ears kid says, "Way to go, Mr. President." The Secretary of Energy could have shot me. He's looking at me like, "I don't know you." And so the president leans around Vice President Bush and he looks at me and he says, "Who are you?" Well, I said, "I'm, in for a dime, in for a dollar." So I say, "Mr. President, I'm Joe Barton. I'm your White House fellow at the Department of Energy." And of course, the Secretary of Energy cringes when I say that. And he said, "Well, Joe, I really appreciate what you just said." And I said, "Well, Mr. President, I really believe in you, and I think that's why you won the election." Okay? And I never got invited to another cabinet meeting. The Secretary of Energy on the way back to the Department of Energy said, he said, "Joe, did you enjoy the meeting?" I said, "Yes, sir." He said, "Well, you better, because that's your last one." And I never got invited again. But I never forgot that, because even in Washington, what's right for America is still the question. And you don't see that on TV. You see us in our non-intersecting conversations on the House floor. Republicans get a minute, the Democrats get a minute. You see in the committee hearings where the Republicans grill the cabinet officials and the Democrats defend them. You see it on Fox News or CNN or MSNBC, where the Republican Party has talking points and the Democratic Party has, parallel universe talking points. But most of us, and of course you're here in the Republican Club, the Capitol Hill Club, in the Eisenhower Room, regardless of political affiliation, most of us that get to be called U.S. representatives or U.S. senators, we really do want to do the right thing for America. Now, we represent different constituencies. I represent a conservative, middle-class district in Arlington, Texas, and Ellis and Navarre County, which are rural counties just south of Dallas-Fort Worth. My lifetime conservative rating is over 95%. I'm pro-balanced budgets, pro-small government, pro-choice, pro-life on the right to life, pro-Second Amendment, right to keep and bear arms. I mean, whatever your hot-button issue is, I'm going to be at the 95th percentile or to the right. But a lot of my Democratic friends represent districts that are 95 or 90% to the left. And the beauty of our democracy is, while we yell and scream at each other up here, over time, when you decide what's the right thing for America, you being the people, we'll follow you. And when you don't know what the right thing is, then we get what you see now as gridlock. And so having you folks come to Washington, D.C., spend 2 or 3 days of your time, or 4 days, I'm told you got here Monday and you're going back home on Thursday, is important. Because if you get to see your congressman or senator, you're unfiltered. You're not a focus group. Most of you represent small businesses. Some of them are second and third generation family businesses. I'm told most of you represent business groups, business entities that have 10 or 15 or fewer employees. That's the real world. What little I know about your businesses, you've got to make decisions every day. Is that a good credit risk? What do I offer for this vehicle? What do I sell it for? What kind of warranty, if any, did I put on it? What kind of disclosure? So you've got to make these decisions every day. And if you make good decisions, your business prospers. And if you make ungood decisions, your business doesn't. So when you get the chance to see your congressman, again, be polite, tell the truth, but don't sugarcoat it. And then leave it to us to decide after we hear both sides. And believe it or not, somebody's going to tell us whatever the other side is. We'll decide what the right thing to do is. And I believe that. That's why I'm still in Congress. It's not for the pay, and it's not for the perks, and it's for the opportunity to do good and help our country. And I think I speak for every member of the House, regardless of political affiliation, when I say that. Now let me talk briefly about some of the issues. Let's start with what's normally the number one issue these days, and that's the Affordable Care Act, or the Obamacare. When that was debated, I was a senior Republican on the Energy and Commerce Committee, so it was my job to present the Republican alternative in the committee and on the floor. And I went to John Boehner and Eric Cantor, we were then in the minority party, so Mr. Boehner was the minority leader and Mr. Cantor was the minority whip. And I said, what do you want to do on health care? What's the Republican House position going to be? And they said, well, we don't know. Now, they didn't quite put it that way, but it was basically, we don't really have an official position. Do the best you can and keep us informed. Don't go out on any limbs. But so I went to Henry Waxman, who was the chairman of the committee from California, and I said, Henry, let's work together on health care. Now, this is 4 years ago. And Henry said, I'd love to work with you on health care. And so we arranged to have what we call little brown bag lunches, where Republican and Democrat members of the Energy and Commerce Committee would get together and we'd have an issue and we'd try to debate it and decide if there could be common ground. Off the record, off camera, no sound bites. Well, the first one was scheduled and something came up and Henry called me and said, we got to postpone it. I said, fine. So we scheduled it for 2 weeks later. The second one came up, called me again, have to postpone it. Third one, have to postpone it. So finally, fourth time, now this is 2 months down the road, and we had it definitely scheduled for 11:30. I want to say on a Wednesday morning, but I could be wrong about that. Well, about 10:30, Chairman Waxman calls me. He said, you're not going to believe this, Joe, but we're going to have to postpone it again. I said, Henry, you've been putting it off. I've been very patient. Why in the world are you postponing it today? And his answer was, well, we're going to have a press conference at 11 and we're introducing our bill. Yeah. I said, what the hell? You're introducing your bill? He said, yeah, we're introducing our bill. I said, well, Henry, the whole point of this brown bag lunches was to try to find common ground and have a bipartisan bill. He said, I know. He said, you can still co-sponsor the bill. Okay? Now, I may look dumb, and there are days my constituents definitely know that I am dumb, but I'm not that dumb. And I said, Henry, let me tell you, you have just turned me, and probably every Republican in the House, from an open, undecided, to not only a no, but a hell no. I said, you better know what you're doing, because you're going to get no help from me. If you're going to introduce your bill, and then your idea of bipartisanship is I can co-sponsor the bill, that's not a deal. That's not a deal. And as it turned out, we had one Republican vote for the bill on the floor in the House, a Vietnamese American from New Orleans. It was represented in an 80% African American district. He voted for it, but that's the only one. He got beat the next election, and then in the Senate, no Republican voted for it. And from that day forward, when Chairman Waxman called me and said, we're going to have to postpone our brown bag lunch one more time because we're introducing our bill, It didn't happen overnight, but basically the entire Republican elected constituency here in the House and the Senate, we went from open-minded to, if you're going to ram it down our throats and the American people's throats, we're not going to accept it. And so today, as it's being implemented, one political party's got ownership of that bill, and that's the Democrat Party. And when you hear us debate it in the committees and on the floor, it really is as if we're in parallel universes. I mean, the Democrats keep talking about all the good things it's going to do and how it's going to help everybody, and people like me talk about there's no choice and all these mandates and the strangulating bureaucracy. There's some merit on both sides, to be honest, but it's now in the implementation stage. And I think it's finally dawning on those who voted for it. This is real. This isn't a soundbite war anymore. 3 million people have had their individual policies canceled. Small businesses are making sure they don't employ more than 50 people. Health insurance premiums are going up. And of course, the latest and greatest, the president's claim, if you like your health insurance, you'll keep it, has turned out to be a flat lie. And he knew it at the time. He knew it at the time. We pointed it out in the hearings 3 years ago. You said a minimum mandate, every policy has to cover. If you've got a health insurance plan now that doesn't meet those minimums, it's going to get canceled. And that's what's happening. And I'll tell you this, if you work for a Xerox or an IBM or a Ford Motor Company or any big corporation, in the next 2 years, your policy is going to be canceled too. Because as soon as they begin to enforce the employer mandate, which they're not enforcing this year or next year, but when that thing kicks in, if you're a publicly traded company, to provide the health insurance cost you, say on average, $10,000 an employee. Now you get a 34% tax or 36% tax credit, so that $10,000 you pay out in health insurance premiums per employee, you get $3,600 back, but it's still costing you $6,400. The tax penalty if you don't provide the insurance is no more than $2,000. What's the smaller number? $2,000 or $6,400? You're going to pay the $2,000 and put your employees into the exchanges, because the Wall Street's going to require it, because you're going to take that delta and say that could be reinvested in the company, that could be put out in new dividends, invested in capital equipment, whatever. And so this thing about, if you have your health insurance and you like it, you're going to get to keep it. That's the promise that will continue to be broken as long as the Affordable Health Care Act is the law of the land. Because market economics is going to force cancellation. I'm an Aggie. Sometimes I can't talk right. So all I'll say on the health care issue, doesn't matter if you're a Republican or a Democrat, American people aren't stupid. American people don't like being lied to. All these Democrats who voted for it in the House and then the senators who voted for it in the Senate, they're waking up. And so, I'm up for election next year or the year after. And I love President Obama. He's a great guy. But I'm not going to lose my seat over him. So my prediction is sometime this spring or summer, if not sooner, you're going to see the entire law pulled back, delayed, whatever. I have a bill called the OCA, Obamacare Choice Act, which makes it voluntary for a year. Let you choose. Suspend all the mandates, suspend the penalties. Don't delay it, don't repeal it, but just let the law go, and if you like it, take it. And if you don't like it, don't take it, and you're not penalized. And my guess is you take away the mandatory nature of it, most people are going to take a look at it and they're going to say, here's what my health insurance is now, here's what I get, here's what I pay. Here's what I get under Obamacare, here's what I pay. And when you make that, it's just like somebody's coming in your car lot. You know, for $10,000, I get a 3-year-old Ford pickup. You know, the next guy's got a Chevrolet pickup that's 3 years old and it's only $8,000. What's the best deal for me? Okay? And if individuals look at Obamacare and it's a better deal, they're going to take it. And if it's a 50-50 deal, they might take it, might not. But if it's not a good deal, not a better deal, they're not going to take it. And my guess is about 80% of the country is going to say it's not a better deal. So it's going to fall apart. It's not going to fall apart because Republicans are mean and cold-hearted. It's going to fall apart because it was a bad deal to begin with, and the president didn't tell the truth about it, and the American people aren't stupid. So that's my take on that. The next big fight is going to be the budget. We punted a month ago. We've got this committee, this conference committee, that's working to try to reach a budget agreement. Has to do that by January the 9th, and then the debt ceiling, I think, is extended till February the 15th. We didn't make any decisions in the government shutdown. We just agreed at the end of 3 or 4 weeks to postpone it until January and February. The problem's not going away, folks. We're borrowing more money than we're taking in. We've been doing it for almost forever. I've been in Congress 29 years. We've had 4 years of balanced budgets. So that means in my scorecard it's 4 to 25. That's not a very good scorecard. But you know, you can borrow for some time, as you know, in your business, somebody comes in with marginal credit, you can loan them a little bit of money on a car or a pickup. But if they come in next week and they want to buy another one, and they come in the next week and want to buy another one, sooner or later you say, you know, you really can't afford that third car. Well, we've been borrowing against your credit now all these years, and the national debt's up to $17 trillion. Now, how big can it go? Maybe it can go to 20, maybe it can go to 30, who knows? But it can't go to infinity. And the president, in asking for a clean debt ceiling, has never even given us a number. So we're now at the point where $1 trillion is a short-term extension. $1 trillion. When I got elected in 1984 and sworn in 85, the whole federal debt was less than 5. So that's from 1787 to 1984. And now it's at 17, and it's been going up $1 trillion, $1.5 trillion a year. This year was a good year. It only went up $700 billion. You know? So that fight's coming. And again, people like me, I'm tired of kicking the can down the road. So I've already told Boehner and Cantor, McCarthy, if it's a real debt ceiling deal that balances the budget, reduces the deficit to zero, I'm a yes. If it's smoke and mirrors, I'm a no. It's that simple.